Good afternoon. And it is good afternoon, it's just midday, so it's now the afternoon, and welcome and thank you for joining today's event. I'm Bridget Rosewell, I'm one of the National Infrastructure Commissioners who's been closely involved in this particular study that we are here to discuss. I'll introduce my fellow panellists in just a second, but I first wanted to say that we are beaming to you live from in between Grimsby and Immingham in North East Lincolnshire, where we're being hosted by the Catch training facility. Catch is a marvellous example of an industry-led training centre preparing people for the skills we will need for the green economy of tomorrow and focusing particularly on energy. North East Lincolnshire Council's Patch is one of our case study areas, so we may well hear a bit more about Catch later, but for now we'd just like to thank them for welcoming us here today. Joining me is Sir John Armitt, Chair of the National Infrastructure Commission, who will shortly introduce the key findings of our report. Neil Coleman is our fellow Commissioner and was heavily involved in the research. James Heath, the Commission's Chief Executive, is also here, and we're particularly pleased to be joined by Rob Walsh, Chief Executive of North East Lincolnshire Council and North East Lincolnshire Clinical Commissioning Group. We'll be joined on the line, this is hybrid, it's all very modern here, by Tom Pike, Strategic Director for Stevenage Borough Council, another of our case studies, and Tom Walker, Director of the Levelling Up Unit in the Cabinet Office, to offer a central government perspective on our subject. But first, just a few housekeeping notices. The event will be recorded, and by joining, you give your agreement to being captured on film if you decide to switch your camera on at any point. A number of journalists are due to be on the call today, so you should assume that you are speaking on the record. You will find you've automatically been muted to avoid any audio interference, but we will unlock this during the Q&A session so that we can hear your questions directly. In the meantime, do think of some questions, but we would ask that you wait to submit them until later, when we'll ask you to raise the function to raise your hand. I'm sure you're all very familiar with this, so that I can see you have a question to pose. So with that housekeeping done, and without further ado, I'll invite Sir John to give us an overview of the Commission's report, which I should say you can also find online at nic.org.uk. Sir John.
Well, thank you, Bridget, and good afternoon, everyone. It was back in March that the Chancellor asked the Commission to explore how government could maximise the benefits of infrastructure investment for our towns in England, taking into account their many different characteristics. Government no doubt asked us to look at towns and suburban centres for a range of reasons, not least that a lot of infrastructure discussion revolves around large city settlements, but also because of the fact that more than 30 million people in England call a town their home. Finding the best way of helping infrastructure spend to level up towns will take us a long way in achieving that goal for the wider nation. And there's no doubt that infrastructure has an important role to play in supporting economic growth and the quality of life in towns. But it's not a panacea, and there are a wide range of infrastructure outcomes across towns of all sizes and in all regions of England, regardless of where you look, as these charts show. Our fundamental observation is that infrastructure serves towns best when it's considered as part of a long-term strategy that is part of a wider plan for economic development. That plan will encompass policy well beyond infrastructure, notably housing, education and skills. The importance of tailored local plans reflects the fact that our towns and suburban centres are so different to each other, with different geographies, histories, challenges and opportunities. I'm sure that our subsequent speakers will illustrate this vividly, such as Stevenage's plan to regenerate much of their town centre and replace their bus station as part of a 20-year strategy which addresses some of the legacies of new town planning. Such strategies can only be drawn up and expect to attract a sense of local ownership if they're based on robust analysis of the strategic opportunities open to the towns in question, perhaps by virtue of their location or proximity to other places, alongside a detailed look at the existing infrastructure gaps, for instance in local road networks or active travel facilities. Our hosts here in Grimsby, for instance, are working to not only regenerate their river-facing public realm to open up new leisure and cultural opportunities, but have also been implementing plans to better connect the neighbouring ports of Grimsby and Immingham with significant improved road and cycle links. We're currently sat just a couple of minutes away from that new link. Our report explores how we can create the best conditions for such local infrastructure strategies to be realised. And our headline recommendation is that we need to change the present funding system for local transport in particular to better support longer-term planning and implementation by local authorities. The multiple funding streams for local transport that exist today tend to be short-term, ring-fenced, and often require rounds of competitive bidding. We recommend that government streamlines these and provides county councils and unitary authorities with single, devolved 5-year budgets for local transport, in the same way as is recently done for mayoral combined authorities. These devolved budgets should be allocated on a simple basis that reflects population and the size of the transport networks being managed. This will enable the 74 such authorities which are responsible for strategic transport planning to develop and implement local infrastructure strategies that meet local needs and priorities. In addition to the devolved budgets, government should make available targeted funding for larger infrastructure projects in towns where this is most likely to support transformational opportunities. In total, we recommend that around £6 billion per year should be made available for local transport investment in England outside London in the next 5 years. That would mean around a 40% increase in investment compared to 2019-20, enough for county councils and unitary authorities to address priority infrastructure projects in their area, covering both devolved budgets and targeted funding. We think this proposed approach will free up local authorities to focus on delivery rather than bid writing, providing the flexibility to respond to the impacts of COVID-19 and speed up delivery on the ground. It will also enable them to reflect the priorities that matter most locally. Our public research with town residents suggests that when it comes to infrastructure improvements, almost 4 in 10 town residents would prioritise improvements for motorists, such as better road maintenance, while a third would choose better public transport connections to nearby cities, and a similar number would prioritise enhancements for pedestrians and cyclists. Some of these priorities also emerged from our case studies, such as the need Wakefield has identified to better connect the residents to employment sites via public transport. These citizens' preferences underline the importance of place-based plans focused on transport, devised locally. Crucially, under our proposals, councils will also have greater accountability for achieving the objectives they set out in their strategies through clear and measurable outcomes. To assist them, we recommend that government should make available expert strategic advice and support to boost the capacity of these local authorities who need it. And that brings us to our final block of recommendations, things central government should continue to manage centrally. Some services and networks work best when everyone is able to use them everywhere in a broadly consistent way. Central government is clearly best placed to ensure universal provision of such networks and services. And as prime examples, our report highlights the importance of accelerating the rollout of both gigabit broadband and electric vehicle charging points. Central government is also best placed to help test our new ideas that need to be trialled at scale. We propose one such area is helping smaller businesses make the most of new communication technologies through innovation pilots. Our case study from the West Midlands illustrates the potential here, particularly when it comes to 5G wireless technology. In summary, our report calls for a new compact between Whitehall and Town Hall to level up our towns. Each party should be accountable for the things that each is best placed to achieve. We need a new, more flexible and more devolved model for funding local economic development, a model that unlocks the potential of more reliable cycles of funding to improve long-term infrastructure planning and speed up project delivery. I'm grateful to all the local authorities, central government officials, business and civic leaders and others who've contributed to our work. And I would like to thank Bridget, Neil and Tim Besley for their leadership of the project from the Commission side. As always, I also give my thanks to all those in the NIC Secretariat team who've worked on the report. So I look forward to hearing from our colleagues around the country now and to our discussion shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir John. And I'd like now to turn to Rob Walsh from Grimsby, who is here to tell us about what they're up to here. Rob.
Thank you, Bridget. And firstly, can I say a huge thank you to the National Infrastructure Commission for choosing Grimsby as one of its case study areas. And thank you indeed for selecting our borough as the launch pad for this report here at the magnificent Catch facility, a local and regional beacon of industry-led skills development. I'm going to dwell a little bit on the journey to our landmark for us, Greater Grimsby Town Deal of 2018, because I think that experience speaks to a number of the issues referred to in today's very important report. And that town deal, the first town deal in the country, was a huge moment for us. We'd invested in the development of a relationship with government that served to heighten wider awareness of huge economic opportunities in this part of the world, and also the challenges we faced over a multi-generational period. And that town deal was founded on 4 clear and still very relevant areas of focus: driving economic growth, accelerating housing delivery, town centre and port regeneration, and education and skills. And of course, the infrastructure theme permeating all of those to some extent or other. The town deal, crucially for us, was always a lot more than about money. Our early dialogue and engagements with government was centred more on our aspiration to have that single conversation with the government to support those areas of focus I've just referred to. In other words, one department, MHCLG as was, acting as the de facto conduit into wider government, with knowledge, wider awareness and understanding of the Grimsby ambition and the Grimsby story. That was the ideal we aimed for, the town deal and the role of MHCLG to act as the umbrella for any funding, freedoms and flexibilities that would come our way to support local regeneration, investment and growth. Let me be very clear, the Greater Grimsby Town Deal is in so many ways our platform for growth, and we are very proud of what we've been able to achieve with government support. But that vision of a single conversation and conduit never truly materialised. Yes, we've been very successful with the Coastal Communities Fund, the Cultural Development Fund, various local growth and infrastructure funds, and latterly the Towns Fund and the Future High Streets Fund. But that requirement to constantly compete, to submit bids and follow processes that are not always consistent, depending on the funds that we are bidding for, has served to strain our capacity and take the focus away from delivery and progress on the ground. Also, with separate funding streams, inevitably comes a repetitive set of local constitutional processes that by their very nature serve to reduce the pace of change and not necessarily keep things joined up. A streamlined framework and some form of devolved budget with the attendant freedoms and flexibilities to manage that fund within clear parameters would enable us to better manage and deploy local capacity and resources, manage the pace and phasing of project delivery, and crucially, especially for us here, I'm not sure we're alone in North East Lincolnshire in this regard, build local expertise. And yes, we still absolutely expect to be held to account for it. The Levelling Up White Paper, and particularly the county deal model, clearly on a wider geographic footprint, I hope serves as an opportunity to do exactly that. Time will tell. Looking ahead, if you take the specific example of a very significant for our area and region, the Humber Freeport, the infrastructure requirements to maximise that Freeport opportunity are likely to be very significant, both physical and digital. A streamlined and devolved approach that the Commission advocates in today's report would enable us, as the accountable body, to work more effectively with our local authority and private sector partners, plan sensibly together and make local decisions in an orderly and priority-led manner. I'll finish by saying that the Greater Grimsby Town Deal was the pilot town deal. My point, no one size fits all, no two places are the same. Given what we've all experienced over the last 18 months or so and the challenges we face looking ahead, piloting new approaches in towns and regions and being prepared to accept things may not materialise as intended is something that all stakeholders, including government, need to be increasingly comfortable with, as local places are increasingly having to be themselves for a range of valid and very specific reasons. I welcome the report, and once again can I thank the Commission for including North East Lincolnshire in its formulation and the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rob. And as you say, you've picked up some of the themes that we've got into this report. And so now I'd like to turn to a different part of the country and ask Tom Pike to present. He is the Deputy Chief Executive Officer for Stevenage Borough Council, and he's going to another of our case study areas, and he's going to tell us a little bit about their experiences. Tom, over to you.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. It was a pleasure to welcome the National Infrastructure Commission team to Stevenage over the summer, and it's a real privilege to be with you to share our experiences today. I'm deeply passionate about the potential of towns to provide opportunities for local people and local businesses to acquire skills, to grow and have a positive impact, and for towns themselves to make a positive economic impact. And I think the report is very striking in that it highlights that there are ways that investments in towns can create great opportunity. To say a little bit about Stevenage, for those who know less about the place, it's the first post-World War II new town, home to world-class businesses and a burgeoning life sciences sector with very significant growth potential, and in a super location at the heart of the Golden Triangle of Oxford, Cambridge and London. But equally, like many other towns and new towns too, with some stark challenges, with skills level far below the regional averages, deprivation very much centred in the central part of the town, and 1960s infrastructure and architecture in the centre ageing at the same time, causing challenges for the town. And there's a need for us to diversify. So very much our approach is about having a regeneration and renewal plan that sits across local partners. It's not a plan for the borough council, it's a plan that's held in equal part with the county council, with the local enterprise partnership, with government and with business too. And that plan has got three primary components: to transform the town centre, not just to regenerate, but to transform, to change the look, the feel, the vibrancy, to move beyond a ring-roaded 1960s shopping town centre into a vibrant and thriving community and commercial place. To connect, using good infrastructure, the business district with the centre of the town, and again that's subject of a levelling up application that we've been working on to try and support the creation of 4,000 more life sciences jobs in this local economy. And then to make the most of the first-rate transport and infrastructure connections that are where the town is located, to be able to derive benefit for local businesses and local people. So I think the report is very good at looking at how to bring investment into local economies, into local places, and very strong in focusing on the importance of placemaking and how people experience the town in which they live or work. So what does this mean for Stevenage? I think there are three particular benefits set out in the report. I think the first is with greater certainty and clarity of funding, there's more opportunity to plan ahead and more opportunity to make sure investors and partners work together so that any funding we can secure has the greatest impact and derives the greatest benefit. I think focusing the investment to improve place, particularly where there's a transformational need and impact, is very welcome. I think there are a number of towns in that camp of needing pace, scale and impact to overcome deprivation challenges and show a bright way forward. And I welcome too the call to arms for central and local government to work together closely to tackle deep-rooted challenges. This isn't about one bit of the system solving the problem on its own. It's about all of us working together using our skills, resources, local knowledge, national levels of capability, and on a vision that's owned by many local people to derive success. So I think in terms of moving forward, I've been a long supporter that you need to have vision-led plans, and the plans need to be competently formed and well worked on with other partners, so that we can unite around a vision and show how we can then implement that vision. I think as a town, we've derived some very good lessons about the importance of having a flexible strategy, a strong evidence base, and I've welcomed government's capacity building investment that we would say locally has had a very significant and substantial effect in forming the very best town deal that we could put together. So we very much welcome that approach, and I'm sure others would also benefit from the same in the future. Reducing time spent on bid overheads, on navigating many complex funding streams will help us deploy projects more effectively, not just on bid criteria, but on efficiency of delivery and on social and economic impact. It will allow us to order our projects to have the best impact and allow us to both develop and retain our in-house teams, but also our supply chain. So working this through for Stevenage, I think this type of approach is very much welcome. We can see it coming through things like the town deal. And I think investing in key infrastructure, certainly in the town that I've got the pleasure to work with, investing in and around the station area and into the town centre, into sustainable transport and the connections into the business district would have very significant impacts and will unlock many hundreds and thousands of jobs and beyond. So it's a pleasure to have been involved in the study. I think you should be commended on a very good piece of work. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. And I'm now going to turn to a different Tom Walker from the Cabinet Office, who will give us much more of the Whitehall perspective on our work, and indeed, provide that broader piece of perspective on how these results will go through into policy. So, Tom, over to you.
Great, thank you, Bridget. Hello, everyone. Have you got me now?
Yes.
Yeah,
we can hear you.
Very good. I will carry on. The question everyone is asking in Whitehall is, where am I sitting? So to introduce myself, Tom Walker from Cabinet Office, but we're actually sitting now in Michael Gove's new department. The Wi-Fi, I should say, is better in the Cabinet Office than it is here. So if you need to jump in and pause me, please do. I'll just give a few remarks. I'm leading the team with Neil O'Brien working on the Levelling Up white paper. Your report is perfectly timed. The downside is I can't tell you what's in the white paper just yet. If you were a few weeks later, I'd be able to do that. And if we were a few weeks earlier, we'd really be in the fact-finding phase. But I'll give you an overview of where we are and how people can feed in and what to look out for. So just a little bit of background on the Levelling Up unit. We've been working for 4 months with Neil O'Brien from the Cabinet Office right across government on the agenda, essentially taking the Prime Minister's ambitions, which were set out in the speech of the 15th of July and remain the best guide to the scale of the challenge on levelling up, and working out a policy programme that we will bring forward in the white paper on a similar timetable to the spending review. What have we been doing? Well, we've been out right across the country, and in fact, Catch there in Grimsby was the place where I went on my very first visit after lockdown with Neil and with a number of other colleagues to talk about related issues. But the key thing in the Prime Minister's white paper, where this report makes a really important contribution, is that levelling up isn't just a narrow set of regional growth or local growth programmes, but is really about raising living standards, spreading opportunity, improving public services, and crucially, and I welcome this in your report, John, restoring public pride in place, the role that transport and infrastructure has. So as I say, it's broader than local growth. Many of you will know me and that I led on the agenda in government from MHCLG and Bays for 3.5 years, setting up the mayoral combined authorities, working with LEPs, working on growth deals. But our agenda does stretch in to questions of health deprivation, educational attainment, and as I've already said, crucially, the pride in place. On the report itself, I mean, the timing is absolutely perfect, but the recommendations and the evidence you bring forward chime exactly with what leaders right across the country, including in England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, tell us about transport funding. I think it's with the grain of what we have done before, as the report says, on mayoral combined authorities. So we're very pleased to have it in time for the sort of endgame negotiations that Department of Transport we will be having with the Treasury on the spending review. We really welcome, and pleased to have seen a copy a couple of days before, but really welcome, as I've already touched on, the emphasis on pride in place as well as just economic connectivity. We think that's crucial, and I hope in the white paper we'll be saying a lot more about that. The final thing I just wanted to say from a personal experience, having led this agenda before, I know that we can make progress, and having been Deputy CEO at Homes England, the importance of being able to make infrastructure investment, flexible, stable, alongside what we were doing on housing. The other thing that I think we have to get right, and we always get hung up on in Whitehall, is having devolved huge sums of money through growth deals. The PAC took a very careful and close examination of what we've done, and there were definitely lessons learned there about the data we collected, some of the monitoring and evaluation. So the really tough circle to square is actually how you make those commitments to long-term budgets, but ensure the accountability is sufficient. Ministers like to know what's going on. Parliament certainly does. And if you don't get that right, or if we don't get that right, it actually generates even more work and the pendulum swings. So I think it does merit really, really serious consideration. And in the end is why I think this is so welcome, because it's a serious consideration of those issues rather than a simplistic call for devolution of budgets. But it's very much with the grain and the direction of travel that we are taking on the white paper, which I hope will be in the public domain in the next few weeks. Final thing for me, Andy Haldane has just been appointed. We've had a bit of movement, obviously, in who's leading the agenda in the Secretary of State. So Neil O'Brien is now Junior Minister in the new Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. We're still supporting Neil. We will report to Michael Gove, and Andy Haldane starts with us next week. The Levelling Up unit, in effect, becomes the task force and on to the next stage. So I'm sure as commissioners, you'll be engaged with me and Andy as we develop the agenda even beyond what we will say in the white paper. So thank you very much for inviting me. I hope it's a hopeful overview, John and Bridget, of what we're doing. There'll be much more detail very shortly, and very welcome to engage with both of those in the audience and commissioners as that happens. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, and we will obviously look forward with bated breath for the report to come out and the white paper to come out. There's so much stuff that is going on in different places. I'm very pleased to know that this is all beginning to come together in the same place. But we now have about 30 minutes for questions. So if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and I will be able to come to you. And if you want to ask a question of a particular person, do indicate who that might be. But in the first instance, I'm looking forward to seeing some questions. There must be somebody out there who's got one. I can't see who that is. Come on. Chris Byrne.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, indeed we can.
Hi, my name's Chris Byrne. I'm the political editor at the Yorkshire Post. I guess my first question is probably a simple one to Tom Walker. How likely is it that these recommendations will find their way into the Levelling Up white paper?
Tom, is that a question you feel able to answer?
Well, at a high level, of course. I mean, as I said in my comments, the sort of recommendations chime exactly with what we're hearing. Obviously, there's a spending review. Ministers will take decisions about length of budget, etc., etc. But what this report, I think, is doing is channeling a consensus that we hear when we engage with local leaders.
And can I just ask a supplementary to that? I suspect there may not be an answer to this. Is there any date yet for when the Levelling Up white paper is likely to emerge?
No, the press notice that announced Andy Haldane's appointment said later this year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So maybe before, with other people still coming through, maybe I might ask a general question. So what is it that infrastructure can deliver for people within and towns within this across the UK in this levelling up agenda? Let me come first. Well, in fact, Neil, why don't I bring you in at this point? What do you think the main infrastructure challenges are? What's infrastructure deliver?
Well, I think the social research that's contained in the report is very interesting, and as you've said, there's a very clear focus on transport and on roads in particular, and obviously that's challenging in a sense because, as we know, we have the government commitments and the necessary commitments to net zero, And it's one of the reasons for the emphasis in the report on the need to press ahead with electric vehicle charging, to sort out the strategy on that, which needs very substantial new investment. But I do think we often, with the preoccupation on cities, we do ignore the fact of how important it is for people in towns to be able to travel by car, to access economic opportunity, to access things that they need to do in their ordinary lives. And I think that's an important challenge to us. Public transport is important, but we do need to work with the grain of what local people's concerns are. And I think that's one of the things that comes with looking at building this bottom up, and why that is such an important recommendation here, that you can only connect with local people's concerns and retain their support and push ahead with the feeling that levelling up isn't just a phrase, it's something that's about their quality of life, their economic opportunities. If you have this firmly founded on what local people want, on what local authorities can do working with their local communities, and I think that's a central theme one which likely to hear being so responsive to, I suppose. And I'm not surprised by that, because as he says, there is a strong feeling here. And I mean, he's talked about Andy Haldane's appointment, which is, I think, great news. And I know one of the things which Andy's been very much on the record as saying is you can only do levelling up bottom up, from the base, from towns, people and communities. And I hope our report adds further strength to that theme and those objectives.
Thanks, Neil. Is there anybody who would like to add anything to that, or should we move to okay? Let's. I'll move then to Miranda Barker. Would you like to ask your question, please?
Thank you. I'm Miranda Barker. I'm the Chief Executive of East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce. So this is a project very much after our own heart, because we aren't cities, we are towns like Blackburn and Burnley who are specialising in advanced manufacturing. I love the fact that we're talking about really long-term transformational change as part of levelling up. That's absolutely what it should be. Two things I really hope are featured strongly in the whole project, one of which I know you've spoken about, which is transport, but especially for moving freight, not just people. But the one that I want to ask, is it in there, is energy provision. And I'm not even talking about with the current crisis that we're seeing, and I'm not even talking about the fact that we'll need massive more energy provision when we move to electric vehicles and electric heating. I'm talking about the fact that an awful lot of my manufacturers right now want to expand their production, and they can't because there isn't sufficient energy supply now. So if levelling up is about investment from government that can unlock real economic potential in the north of England and elsewhere, which I think it should be, then that's something I really hope you understand is a really crucial need.
Okay, so you'd like some comments on the priorities?
If that's understood, and if it's really recognised that our energy system right now is not allowing the expansion of our manufacturing production facilities.
Energy production is certainly something that we will be looking at in the context of the next National Infrastructure Assessment, which is coming through, rather than this more specific work around towns. But I might ask James, would you like to comment on the on how we were thinking about energy?
Yeah, I can do that. I'm Miranda. So this particular study, the terms of reference for this particular study from Treasury were very much focused on transport and digital infrastructure. So when you get a chance to read the report, you'll see that it's the role of transport and digital change that underpins the analysis and the recommendations. However, I think you raise a very interesting point about the role of energy infrastructure, both, if you like, the future and how green energy infrastructure can play a role in certain areas in driving economic opportunities. But actually, your focus actually on the here and the now, and you do raise some interesting questions. I mean, I've certainly thought about it in the context of how energy distribution networks need to be upgraded and enhanced to deal with new demands for electricity, new pressures like electric vehicles. I think what you're talking about is actually, if you're more like business as usual, energy supply for manufacturing. And I'd be interested in having a sort of further conversation with you about that, because it's not an area which has come out of the engagement so far that we've had, but certainly, as Bridget said, in the next national infrastructure assessment, our every 5 year major piece of work where we look at all aspects of infrastructure, including energy, we will want to get into the energy space in quite a big way. And we've got to follow up, because we're all thinking about the future of green infrastructure and green energy and its regeneration opportunities, but you actually seem to raise some questions about the current supply and its constraints on it.
It's something I'd like to take forward with you if we can, because when we've had conversations leading up to the Infrastructure Commission, this was very much part of our submission, and we feature it every time, that we know very much that transport and broadband are hugely important, but this third thing has been missing. Even so ridiculously is the fact that our Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, based on one of our economic development zones, can't complete its second phase in Lancashire because there isn't the power supply to allow further buildings on there. We've got manufacturing jobs that are literally being held back by current energy supply. So if we can take it forward, that would be very positive. Thank you.
I hear that message. John, did you want to come in briefly?
Yeah, it's a good question, Miranda. And of course, you see this problem very often with large-scale housing developments as well, where in fact the housing developer almost can't actually proceed with selling his houses, because in fact the power supply is insufficient to meet, particularly on the larger scale housing developments, the energy need. And it, as you say, it always points to the and of course, what happens then is the housing developer is asked to actually make quite significant financial contributions towards the upgrading of the local distribution network as a way of paying for the energy distribution company to meet its own bills. So I think it's a very good point, and it's one which, in a sense, ought to be, it just plays to, once again, I think, the need for that regional strategy in which the distribution companies play an active part in it, because as James was saying, when we did our smart energy review a couple of years ago, very much that focused on the need for that local understanding of the power supplies locally, which ought to play into those companies that have that responsibility, who need to be part of this strategic plan, of which transport is one. But you're absolutely right to focus on energy, because it's not much good, as you say, having a factory if you haven't got sufficient juice flowing into it to make your product. So I think it's a very good point you raise, and one which needs to be clearly thought about by Tom and his team when they're thinking about these issues, and the role of Ofgem in something like this as well.
Clearly, it's both production and distribution. Both of these issues need to be thought about, and it's cross-cutting into other things. So it's absolutely something that we think about all the time, and almost in all of our general work, not necessarily always specifically. But Tom, did you feel, is this something that you think will feature in levelling up, or are you seeing this more as a general issue which needs to be dealt with at in bays and in more sector function? Tom?
Yeah, I mean, so I certainly recognise the issue from the work I did previously, leading the country. I think. Can you hear me? I think we've got a connection, I'm afraid.
But a quick answer would be appreciated.
Yeah, quick answer, if you can hear me, I hope you can, is I think this is a sort of day job engagement with bays, but we can certainly pick that up with James, and I recognise the issue from the work I've done in places. Will it be a big focus of the white paper? I think it will be a sort of consequential issue to the white paper in terms of sort of what do you need to unlock growth and drive productivity across the country, but very happy to have more detail on it. Over.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's turn then to Councillor Galton. Come to the top of my hands up list.
Okay, hi, thank you. I've been involved with the LGA and the Economy, Environment, Housing and Transport Board, quite a large title. And I'm interested in terms of how we can refocus the Levelling Up programme away from a conversation between government and local government officers and actually make it more community based, as I think the emphasis in this report is trying to emphasise. When we talk about place-based decision making, if you're in an area like mine in Leeds, it's an area that's covering 800,000 people and actually includes lots of towns that are associated with a very major urban core. But it's very hard for those towns within that conurbation to have a distinctive voice and for the needs of their community to be heard above the economic driver of city centre based office-led employment programmes. And how does the National Infrastructure Commission think that we can better enable those local voices? For instance, I'm not sure where the concept of 20-minute neighbourhoods comes in, but without some forward planning for developing some of our town centres and district centres to the same level that city centres have had in terms of focus, then we'll never be in the position to deliver shovel-ready schemes for the kind of very targeted spending that the government tends to want to prefer to do. So to summarise, is there anything in there about capacity building for those towns to deliver the planning to enable them to be shovel ready for when the government aims to give them some money?
I have to say I've tried to abandon the term shovel ready because nothing's really shovel ready until the shovel is in the ground. But having said that, yes, there certainly is material about building right across the whole of the universe of towns, if you like, in the report. I think that the individual towns and how they're relating to their conurbations actually differs quite a lot across the conurbations. Leeds was one of the case study cities that we looked at when we did our city work. And then there was quite a lot of engagement also, not just with the city, but also thinking about how that related to other locations in the conurbation and in the travel to work area. So I think it's something that we're aware of, but also it definitely makes you aware that there isn't a one size fits all, that different towns in different conurbations and outside conurbations have different sorts of relationships. And so it is very much about allowing that capacity building to take place, making expert advice available, giving the resources for that expert advice to be delivered. So I think there's quite a lot of material in there. I don't know if anybody else wants to.
Yeah, I mean,
Neil.
I think it's a big challenge, this. I mean, one of the recommendations in the report is very focused on capacity building and suggests that we need to look at a significant investment in this and talks about the need to identify a national organisation that could support this. I think there may be some issues about exactly who that should be and how it should be done. But I think the challenge really is to get close to communities in a real sense. And this is quite challenging. So there's a lot of talk about sort of remoteness from Whitehall, which I think is fair. But certainly in my experience, often where you've even got sort of receptive and strategically well-focused combined authorities, there can be a feeling among towns that they're just as remote as Whitehall. And I just think, that's the challenge really. And it's about enabling and empowering towns as an important part of this agenda. And they are very different. And I don't know Leeds very well. I know Ilkley though quite well. And there's a lot of towns that are very not like Ilkley around Leeds as well. So, they are very individual. And I think one of the focuses in this capacity building has got to be to get down to that level and to think about, because we've also got to get the combined authorities in just the same way as we're challenging government, we've got to challenge them to respect and focus on communities and the people and the individual towns, which are very distinct in character. So I hope there is stuff in the report, but there's quite a lot of work to be done, which I'm sure is very much some of the focus the things that Tom and colleagues are thinking about in the context of a white paper and so on.
And it's certainly a theme that we'll be continuing to look at as we continue to do our broader work. So thank you very much for that question. So I'm now going to turn to Andrew Pritchard. Andrew, what was your question?
Thank you, Bridget. And I think as a representing a non-metropolitan area, East Midlands councils, which covers the whole of the East Midlands, it's really good to hear about this in terms of a place that doesn't have a mayoral combined authority, isn't likely to get one anytime soon, that there is some kind of approach that was relevant to us. So I very much broadly support the thrust of your report. My question relates to an observation actually over the last kind of like 30 years I've been involved in this sort of stuff. Often local authorities are quite stable in terms of the personnel at political level, often officer level, and certainly quite stable in terms of the thrust of what needs to happen. The priorities, the local priorities don't tend to change that much. But actually central government changes with bewildering regularity at both ministerial level, but particularly at civil servant level. And what an approach is sort of okay one year and then not the next year. And therefore having that kind of ongoing dialogue with central government is really, really challenging from a local perspective, in my experience, for those sorts of reasons. And I just wonder whether your report addresses that issue, recognises that issue, and how it wants to put a sort of that relationship between the central and the local on a more consistent footing, which isn't quite as dependent on people, basically.
Thanks, Andrew, for the question. And I would say that it's certainly something that the proposition that you have given budgets over a longer term period helps to give that stability and the stability of organisation and of planning. I'm not sure we directly address that difference between how people move in one location to another. John, how would you respond to this?
Well, in a way, I suppose my response, Andrew, is that what we're trying to do with this report is, in a sense, exactly address the point you're making, because what we're actually trying to do, with due respect to Tom, is take central government out of the picture. By saying that actually these decisions, the strategic thinking, does need to be done at a local level, and it's the local politicians who should be held to account for those decisions. They should also be held clearly to account for the expenditure, and Tom made the point, the tricky issue of government and others wanting to see that the money is being spent efficiently. But that oversight of how the money gets spent at the end of the day, I don't think should take away from what we're really asking for here, which is devolution on 5-yearly cycles of significant funds, which enable the local body with its what we're recommending is a 15-year strategic look ahead, using the sort of stability that you're talking about to have consensus around that 15-year strategic look ahead, to know, like Network Rail and others do, that they've got that 5-year funding stream coming through. And of course, part of it, of course, is that you have to assume that your 5 years funding stream isn't going to go up and down like a yo-yo as well. There'll be some consistency in the level of funding, because you can't just think 5 years ahead, you've got to think further ahead than that. But fundamentally, what we're trying to say here, all of that thinking, all of that planning, all of that responsibility needs to be held locally and reduce, in a sense, the role of central government, where, as you say, there are inevitably probably more higher turnover of personalities. And, but this way we can hopefully minimise the impact of that higher turnover, which probably isn't likely to change anytime soon.
I mean, Rob, is this a challenge that you've recognised as well, that dealing with turnover and this the difficulty of changing priorities? Is that something that you think we need to really be more focused on?
I think in terms of the interface between local and central, sometimes changes in faces have sort of deflected the conversation. I think the freedom and the flexibility that this report is seeking to encourage government to consider giving to local places, particularly towns, that longer period of time to deliver, to manage projects, and trust, to be honest. With that accountability, that comes with it, I think is a good thing. But locally, very parochially, you know, if together, and I really take on board the point about bottom-up, community-led, because that's what we're still learning to do here in North East Links, as many areas are. I think in terms of what this paper is saying and what hopefully the levelling up paper will give us the opportunity to do, is really build genuinely from the bottom up, where local authorities actually themselves, never mind the government, actually in certain points in this journey, step out of the way too and let things happen within a framework. So things can happen in the right way for the right reasons, and very bespoke reasons, particular to those places.
I won't ask Tom Walker to come in because I know he's got a slightly dodgy connection, but I think it might be worth saying on his behalf that the challenge of managing the accountability and how the politicians and PAC, Public Accounts Committee, and MPs wish to see that accountability happen, that is something that we're all going to have to continue to bear in mind. So, I'm making that point on your behalf, Tom. I hope that's something that you would want to make. And in the meantime, I'm going to move on to Robert Hamilton. Robert?
Thank you very much indeed. So I'm the Chief Economist of the North Tyne Combined Authority, which is a mayoral combined authority in the northeast of the country, and actually an area that's benefiting from quite a bit of investment in some of our towns, not least by the rejuvenation of a railway line connecting some of the deprived towns and communities in southeast Northumberland. The point I wanted to come back to, and the chart that's been puzzling me for the last half an hour, was the satisfaction with digital and transport infrastructure. And in some ways, it's quite a challenge to some people like myself who we often believe in the need for greater investment or relative investment in public transport or digital infrastructure, but yet we are aware of dissatisfaction, particularly on the roads. But I guess my plea would be, or question perhaps rather than a plea, would be if the question was rephrased as the transformative impact of further investment in some of these categories, I wonder if the answer would be slightly different. Certainly here in the northeast, we are aware of the potential for transformative impact for further investment in digital infrastructure. The northeast and indeed some of our towns no longer become so remote or so sort of disconnected from the main transport networks. I guess it's just a plea that we maintain the emphasis on digital infrastructure.
Fortunately for you, somebody cleverer than I am certainly has managed to put up that again, the slide again. And as you say, there is greater satisfaction. And maybe if you asked a different question, that would you be interested in having a greater supply, and depending also who you ask, of course, whether these are businesses or residents or so on. So these are people living in towns, and we're trying to get something which is cross-cutting. And I think it is quite important to remember, particularly for people in towns and people who are not living in major conurbations, and particularly for people who are not living in London, that actually roads matter, and that is something that people actually forget. The potholes matter. I mean, I live in a village. The road really matters to me just as much as the broadband. So yes, if we ask a different question, and we will certainly be continuing to look at broadband again for our national infrastructure assessment, but I think it's particularly important actually to ask people what they really care about as well. I don't know, does anybody else want to come back in on that question? James.
I just make a follow-up point, and I think perhaps what this data may be reflecting is actually the fairly high level of resilience of digital broadband infrastructure during COVID. It didn't fall over, as I think some people anticipated it might, and I suspect that, combined with the sort of accelerating rollout plans they're seeing for digital infrastructure, may be reflected in some of this. I think you make a fair point that we've got to distinguish between the extent to which digital infrastructure is meeting today's needs, current needs, and what the future and expanding needs are, both for business and people. And therefore, there needs to be another cycle, another wave of investment to anticipate and meet those future needs. I think that's really quite interesting. We're seeing it now with the gigabit broadband rollout plan, but I think we've got to quite closely monitor and focus on the extent to which that level of investment is going to meet the future needs and future demands, so we don't have a situation where digital infrastructure becomes a constraint on future growth 10, 15 years hence. And I think that's really quite important, particularly as digital might start to substitute for transport in sort of many ways, depending on what the work and patterns are and the sort of living patterns are sort of post-COVID. So it's a really interesting point you make.
Thank you very much. And I've got one last question, and this will be the final question before I hand back to Sir John to close us down. David Laister. Where are you?
Hi, thanks very much for the opportunity. Yeah, Dave Laister, I'm the business editor for the Humber for Reach Regionals. Pleased to be part of Rob's area.
We can hear you.
I just wondered, sort of rolling back to the initial ask and you know, understanding local communities, how important partnerships are with sort of strategic industry and businesses in those areas. I know obviously Rob Walsh with North East Lincolnshire Council has very strong relations with some of those key pillars, and how important that is to sort of framing what is required and then delivering as part of this sort of rolling 5-year plan, which seems to make a lot of sense.
That's a very broad question, and my own position would be that partnerships are absolutely crucial, and that building those partnerships is how you build both capacity and trust and confidence. But let me turn to see what other reactions there are. Rob and Neil, but very quickly because we are running out of time.
Hello, Dave, and thank you. So you've answered the question really, but as you know, locally we've invested heavily, not perfectly, but heavily in that cross-sector relationship, public, private, and increasingly voluntary sector, where we need to do a bit more. We've majored on in the initial phase, as you know, of the journey over here in North East Links on the relationship with big industry, but increasingly, as well as you know, that SME relationship is becoming very, 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 very important, particularly after the last 18 months. So it's the multiplicity of relationships that we've still to develop together, and they go both ways, of course. It's not council-led, it's convening, it's facilitating, it's enabling. And again, the local authority, when it needs to and should do, stepping out of the way to let stuff happen. But you've heard me say that a million times, so quiet.
So let me ask some others. Neil.
Well, I've sort of been working off and on in Grimsby with Rob and others over quite a long period now. And I mean, across the Humber at the moment, you know, we have potential for huge and exciting economic growth as agendas around wind energy, industrial decarbonisation, hydrogen go forward. And I just think that these relationships with business, and I think Rob's absolutely right. So the relationship with some of the big players here, whether that's Drax or Ørsted or Equinor or Philips or whoever, is absolutely fundamental. We need those people. They're in dialogue with government. They need to be in dialogue locally, because we want to make sure that as they expand, as new jobs are created, that local communities really do feel the benefit of that. And there's a big agenda around educational attainment, around skills, that those big companies play a really big role in. And most of them are very keen to do that. And we need that focus. And we need to build, I think, even stronger partnerships across the Humber as a region as a whole, because we need to recognise that it's a functional and economic area. And, you know, we're going to be talking about building pipelines from one bank to the other and out to the North Sea. And we've got to keep that focus on the Humber. But Rob's point about the supply chain and the critical role of small businesses and how that develops is also really fundamental, and we need their engagement as well. So I think the point you raise in this region, in this area, for opportunities for local people, whether they live in Grimsby, in Scunthorpe, in Goole or in Hull, absolutely crucially important. And I really hope continue to succeed in developing those relationships and building links between the public and private sectors here.
Before we close on that, I'd just like to bring in Tom Pike to ask what's your response to this question. So let's widen it out from just the Grimsby and the Humber area. Does the same apply to you?
Absolutely. I think the experience over the last 5 years has been we as a council have benefited from capacity building and funding from our local enterprise partnership. I think the strength of partnership between different bits of the government system, different local authorities, enterprise partnerships and government itself is crucial, and it's by uniting our skills and capability into a plan that is most attractive to investors, businesses and others who are looking to generate success. And perhaps our best local example is an American firm who are pioneering a new life science treatment, and their experience of working with a team locally, they didn't deal with one public body, they dealt with 3 different public bodies, but with us working very, very closely together to make it as easy as possible to navigate, present a united front and be able to secure significant investment, a significant facility to create 300 jobs. And it's that approach, and that's just one fragment of partnership working that's required across the public sector, but that unity of vision and action is vital. If you haven't got that, I think it's very hard to get off the ground, is my personal view.
Thanks very much. And finally, I will turn to Sir John just to close with some closing remarks. I think that we've covered a lot of ground in this Q&A, and the report itself covers a lot of ground. But Sir John, over to you.
Well, thank you, Bridget, and thank you very much for sharing this morning's discussion, and thank you all for joining us today. We've, to a certain extent, I think we've probably put the ball in Tom's court now with in the work that he's going to be doing on the white paper. I hope, Tom, that what you've heard today and what you see in the report will help you in what I think is absolutely central and understood and clearly believed by so many people in the country, that in getting an more even spread of opportunity across the country and satisfaction in people's lives, that is something which everyone has to be involved in, and therefore it requires that local involvement, local opportunity, and the ability to deliver, and you can't deliver without money. So devolution of funding does become quite central to this, and we'll all, I'm sure, look forward to the white paper. In the meantime, we're starting work on our second national infrastructure assessment, and we'll be publishing a baseline assessment soon. So we look forward to maintaining contact with you all and receiving your input into the work of the NIC. But thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. There will be a copy of the report sent to you all by email. And of course, if you've got any feedback on this event, do let us know. We are still, doing all this hybrid stuff. It's all quite new and challenging. But we will be in touch with you all, I'm sure, very soon. Thank you for joining, and good afternoon.